welcome to the How to Spark Success podcast show. I'm your host, Liz Hamlet, and I'm a business coach and success mentor. And I'm also obviously this podcast host of the How to Spark Success show. And I help businesses and leaders to really spark their success, to get noticed, to get launched. So part of this podcast show is I speak to amazing business owners, leaders and speakers from all around the world, and they share some of their success secrets. So today I've got another amazing guest joining me all the way from Australia, from Perth. And he has worked for 20 years as one of Australia's leading survival experts and instructors. He is a highly experienced speaker and facilitator. He's also got a new book out. He's the author of Unshakable, which is about more than just resilience. And he also uses survival skills to create a world where people understand their own responses and those of others by bringing ancient wisdom to the fast-paced modern world. So I'm delighted to welcome Mike House. Mike, how are you?
I'm really well, Liz. Thanks very much for that introduction and welcome. And wonderful to see your post on LinkedIn that the UK is finally easing COVID restrictions and you're able to get out and about a little bit.
Yes, finally, we're going away after this. So I've waited home just especially for you to do this podcast recording. And then we are running free. So how's things in Perth with lockdown and everything?
Well, Perth has been, we've really had quite a bubble here in terms of, we're often described as the most isolated capital city in the world. And that's meant that the impact has been really small here compared to other parts of the world. Still massively disruptive, but compared to vast chunks of the rest of the world and even other parts of Australia, we've had they said on the radio today, I think our last case of community transmission was 12 months ago today.
Wow.
So we've had a relatively minor brush with it. We've managed it largely through really tight border controls. We're a heavily resources-driven economy, and that side of our economy is sort of ploughed on regardless. So the state's actually pretty buoyant from an economical point of view, and from a personal point of view, we've been very, very free compared to our colleagues on the east coast of Australia and other parts of the world. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. And I was interested to hear, I was listening to one of your other recent podcasts just about, you getting called into a lot of businesses to speak on things like resilience. And, you had quite interesting response to that. But before we get into that discussion, do you want to tell us a bit about your story about, obviously the survival stuff, which sounds amazing. And also, how you got to do what you're doing today, writing books and speaking and helping support businesses?
Yeah, so I spent 20 years working as working as a survival instructor in one of the world's leading arid area survival schools. That's based here in Perth. And the pinnacle thing that we used to do was we'd take people, I'll just chuck up a quick screenshot. We would take people about 1,500 k's north of here into the Pilbara, which is a really arid area. To give you some idea of scale, that's within the same state. 1,500 k's from London would take you to a bit the other side of Rome. So it's a long way away, all within the same state.
Wow.
Really, really arid and dry area. And our pinnacle experience was we'd give people a soapbox-sized survival kit, whatever clothes they were wearing, and 2 litres of water to start. And they'd walk about 200 kilometres over the course of 10 days, sourcing all their own food and water off the land. So it's a bit like Bear Grylls, only real.
Yes, not
not off to the sort of motel at the end of the day. And in parallel to that, that had put me out in the bush for substantial periods of time. My job was to actually walk with groups, but also to create the sense of reality to it. So to try and push groups into duress, to create pressure, to create uncertainty, to try and disrupt leadership and team cohesion and all of that. And in parallel, I'd come back to Perth, and my role here was managing some fairly large scale change projects in a not-for-profit human services organisation. And at one point I realised that I was actually doing opposite ends of the same continuum And in fact, these days, I think that probably loops around and forms a circle where in the survival environment, my job was to create maximum uncertainty. And in the change environment, it was pretty much to do the opposite. And I found myself pulling or pushing the same levers to do that. And I thought, there's something in this. You know, one of the beauties of that survival environment is that it's very clean and uncluttered. And the feedback loops are really, really clear. So you can see very rapidly the results of things like people, how they lead, how they build rapport, how they communicate, how they solve problems, how they set targets and work towards them, how they adapt when things don't go to plan. The results of those things show up usually in a matter of hours and certainly no more than a day or two. And you can draw really clear lines between them. Whereas in business, a lot of that stuff there's so much other complexity around it and so many variables and factors. It's like, now, is that down to me and what I did, or is it that person, or is it the context we're in? So I kind of started off trying to codify people under pressure and ways that we can work effectively under pressure and get around some of those sort of ancient fight-flight kind of mechanisms for people in business. And then more recently looking at, how do you lead when the environment you're surrounded by is deeply uncertain, and what you're trying to do is create some sort of platform of relative certainty that you can act from. Yeah. And that was the sort of inspiration for the second book, which is called Unshakable.
And do you want to tell us a bit about how Unshakable came to be? And, you've literally just launched this, haven't you, in the last couple of months?
Yeah, so it was released in February, late February, and it's been on the drawing board for a while, Liz, but interestingly, listening to a few of your podcast guests, we often second guess ourselves, don't we? So when I first conceived of the idea of Unshakable, there was a bit of a reluctance on my part to write it, and that was kind of twofold. So on the one hand, it was just outright courage, me saying to myself, well, who am I to be telling people about this? What do I know? I get shaken all the time. And then on the other side of it was a very real sense that the channel of sort of pop psychology at the moment is so full with marshmallowy kind of thinking, where it's like, if you just do this, everything will be wonderful and you'll never experience any hardship and it'll be a straight line to success and stars and fireworks. And I really didn't want to contribute to that noise.
Yeah.
So part of the title was actually written with the of Unshakable in brackets, and that's to recognise that we are actually all deeply shakeable. And I don't believe that the goal is invincibility or invulnerability. That armours us up in an unrealistic way, and in fact makes us more vulnerable, I believe, to disruption. So the catalyst for it was actually COVID, because my business flatlined, like many in the sort of speaking and events space around the world. I had a fairly full book and 3 days worth of phone calls when Australia went into lockdown, cancelling international gigs, cancelling local and interstate gigs. And I found myself sitting at my desk going, okay, so what am I going to do to advance my business during this period? And I thought, well, if ever there was evidence that we need this book, it's when the whole world's being impacted simultaneously by an event that creates great uncertainty. I chose to interview some leaders who I deeply respect here and in other parts of the world, just asking them, what are you making of this? Because, in that first sort of month or so where things were moving really rapidly, there was lots of uncertainty. It was really interesting to get a window into their world. And that confirmed a lot of the content I already had planned for it, and added a heap of depth and nuance to it. And that led to the book.
Brilliant. And, one thing I found really interesting, I was listening to one of your recent podcasts with Bryn, and he was saying, really, you've written all about resilience. And you were saying, well, actually, it's not like exactly what the book says, it's not just resilience. And, the fact that, inherently as human beings, we are resilient. We get through a lot, as a human race. But also, the thought that resilience is very much seen as a sort of singular individual thing, that's inside you and that you've got to have on your own. But, I was quite interested in your views around sort of, you talked a lot about the collective support and, like, I think you mentioned sort of triangulating thoughts and different things.
Yes.
So what's, talking about resilience and, it not just being resilience, what's your sort of thoughts on that, and that, how we adapt?
Well, I think, if we keep it in, if we keep the answer to that in the context of sparking success, probably the useful part is the collective part. And, if you want more, then that interview with Bryn kind of unpacks resilience in a heap of detail over probably about half an hour. So it's pretty interesting. But from that collective kind of perspective, I think we use resilience currently, or we certainly are here in Australia. I'm not sure what it's like for you. We're using it as a little bit of an excuse to gloss over organisational level or system level things that are actually creating duress. So I'll often get people saying to me, oh, my people are just not resilient enough. I need them to be somehow tougher. And it's almost framed through this lens that if they're resilient, then they'll have an easy ride when things get hard. And so the first part, I think, is to say that's just not true. Resilience, by definition, means that we've got our backs to the wall and we're experiencing some sort of hardship or duress or disruption. And it generally means it's pretty tough fighting our way out of that space. And to me, I liken it to courage. You can't have courage unless you are afraid. If you're not afraid, then you're not actually being courageous. You can't have one without the other. So it doesn't equal plain sailing. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is organisations will often say, I need people to be more resilient. And they almost use that as an excuse to say, look, Liz, if you could handle yourself better, then we don't have to address these things that are actually impacting you and you and you. And we kind of fly under the radar with some of that system level stuff. So I would really encourage people at the success level to look at how can we streamline systems? How can we make them easier? How can we make them more purpose fit, less cluttered, less complicated, with a view to reducing duress on our staff, on our customers, on our finances, whatever. So they're easy to deal with, because that means we don't need to be as resilient. I think we often attack ourselves just by making things harder than they need to be. Look for simplicity.
Definitely. And, another thing I've done my research on you, Mike. So I've researched well. So another thing that I was really interested in you saying was in times of duress and high stress, the sort of frontal cortex goes and the decision making goes. And I think, I can't remember, you'll have to sort of remind us exactly what it was. But it's something around sort of in real life or death survival situations. When things go wrong, when people just have that expectation that things won't be far away, help won't be far away, and can you sort of I'm sure you can talk about it more eloquently than I can, being your area of expertise, but I'm sort of quite interested in that.
Yeah, for sure. So what you're talking about there is the fight or flight reaction, fight, flight or freeze, which has been documented for ages, and at its heart is a hardwired physiological survival mechanism. So if you or I are facing a genuine threat to our physical safety, like a tribe coming over the hill to raid the village, or an attack by a pack of wild animals, or a rock fall or something like that, that mechanism is designed to switch on and just get us out of danger via the shortest possible route. And it's designed to be faster than we can rationally think. So if you think about, you're about to head off for your trip, if you're blasting down a motorway somewhere and something flies off a lorry in front of you, even if you had the capability to calculate the speed of that object coming towards you and the kind of course correction you'd need and how much pressure you'd need on a brake pedal, that's way too slow. By the time you ran the numbers, you'd be picking airbag out of your teeth. So that mechanism is actually designed to take the frontal cortex offline and just make you act or freeze or, you know, whatever seems most appropriate. And in a situation like that, traffic situation, it's entirely appropriate because thinking's too slow. But in most of our modern contexts, you know, so we have the same kind of reaction if we're heading into a pressure situation. You know, maybe the biggest negotiation of our life in business today, and we have the same kind of reaction. Or we get onto a stage to speak to an audience, we can have the same kind of reaction. Or someone just presses an emotional button that reminds us of a moment in our childhood, and we feel inferior and attacked, and that can all fire off for us. And we're measurably more stupid in those moments that we literally don't think. We couple that with when we feel stuck, we've got an expectation of where we wanted to be. So if we put that into a business context, pre-COVID, I had a trajectory that was pretty reliable for, you know, where the business was heading, profit margins, the amount of work that was coming in, all that kind of thing. And it literally all stopped. Now, if I carried on with the expectation of that level of income in that moment, I could very quickly run my business into the ground because the income just flatlined for a while.
Yeah.
So you've got to readjust those expectations. And often people get into trouble because they're hanging on to, whether it's expectations, goals, KPIs, whatever it is that they've set. It's like, no, we must achieve this. And more often than not, the criteria we set are actually outside of our control. Yeah. And COVID's proved that in spades, right? So, okay, you actually don't control that. And I would say that's true of even things like sales. You know, we could set a sales target, but I actually have no control over whether someone buys. Mm. So I think it's interesting to hold expectations lightly. They're definitely powerful, but hang on to them lightly. Be prepared to abandon them and shift them.
Yeah.
And keep your eye on things that are actually leading indicators rather than lagging ones. So, you know, the volume of approaches I make, for example, is a much more reliable indicator of something I can control about success than the amount of sales I make, as an example.
Okay. And one of the things I'm really interested in, I always ask this just about, you know, you talked a bit about your background, but, you know, how do you go from 20 years as a survival instructor to now speaking in front of, you know, well, a bit pre-COVID, speaking in front of big groups of sort of execs and different things. So what sort of was that jump? What was that leap?
So it was kind of a mental transition, I suppose. Part one of it was that realization that in the change management environment and the survival environment, I was pulling or pushing the same levers. Yeah. And an appreciation that I held an understanding of people under pressure that was quite unique. There's lots of people that make a career solely out of survival. There's lots of people that make a career solely out of change. It's pretty rare for those things to come together. And then the second thing was that I was interested in how can I increase the amount of impact that this has. So, you know, while that survival work is genuinely life-saving, you know, that if you're lost or stranded in any wild environment, those skills and mindsets could save your life. Really, it's pretty unlikely that any of us will be in that situation. It's a small part of the population. So my thinking was, how can I take that and apply it to things that people are facing every day? Because the skill sets are really valid, whether you're, you know, lost or stranded out in the middle of nowhere, or whether you're just facing pressure in your everyday life. And we get pressure from all sorts of sources.
Okay. So sort of going into some of the questions that we talked about, what do you think is the biggest factor that has helped you to get to where you are today to be successful?
So I've been quite unashamedly Aussie and blokey, and I haven't tried to modify that. So I've kind of played to the survival guy persona a little bit. And what that's helped me to do is it's a bit of a hook. So the survival story is a bit of a hook, and then it's a bit of a Trojan horse. So I can sneak up on people talking about things like psychology and emotion and stress and pressure. using that as the kind of gateway into it. And because of who I am and how I appear, how I sound, that's a little bit of an ambush, really. People go, oh, I wasn't expecting to be in this territory, but here we are.
Yeah.
So that's been part of it. And then I think the other part is that I've been able to translate that experience into some quite diverse environments. So, you know, one of my biggest client groups is emergency response organisations.
Yeah.
And working with leaders who are kind of like, you know, when we're dealing with things that are genuinely life or death in counter-terrorism, bushfires, oil spill response, that sort of thing, you know, really serious life or death, we're putting people's lives on the line with the decisions we make, and we will be probably unfavourably reviewed when everything's settled down and the smoke clears. I've been able to convert it into that kind of environment around sort of really high pressured, high level decision making, and also to, you know, talk to people who are frontline in much more everyday kinds of businesses and business environments too.
Excellent. And I'm sure, you know, with your sort of varied background, you obviously do a lot of reading, because obviously they're sort of interested in the psychology, and I think that's really important, both in the survival stuff and people's reaction, as well as you know, what you're doing with businesses and, you know, the front line. So what's been the sort of best question that you've been asked by the audience in one of your speeches or one of your training courses, something that really stands out? I'd be interested to hear whether it relates to survival or change.
Well, there's a couple that come up fairly frequently. So the survival related one is always, is it a good idea to drink your own wee? Which,
I thought it might be that.
That's a thanks to Bear Grylls kind of thing, and the answer is no, actually.
Oh, right.
It's not a good idea.
Oh, wow.
We could get into that in a bit of detail if that's useful. But the other side of it is, you know, the most common question is, how do I actually get hold of my reactions in pressure moments? Because those fight or flight things are not thinking, they're not conscious. And from the outside, they often look really foolish. You go, why is that person doing that? And sometimes we turn that lens on ourselves after the fact. We go, oh, gee, I should have said this. I should have said that. If I'd been thinking, I would have done blah, 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 you know, the perfect rebuttals and all the information easy to hand. But in the moment, it was just, you know, looking like a goldfish with your mouth flapping and your gills waving. So it's the next most common question is about, you know, some tactics to deal with those moments of pressure when you're actually in them, which, you know, that's really probably the bulk of the content that I put out. And the survival mindset is very much like that. It's how do I get a very rapid return on an investment of energy in a moment where my back's to the wall and I don't have much. And if I squander it, the consequences won't be good. So I've kind of got a tactical mindset, I guess, that I bring to that table. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I know you've mentioned about your love of martial arts, but what would you, that sounds like a great, you know, part of your sort of success habits, but what would you say is sort of other parts of your success habits on a sort of daily or weekly basis?
So I'll go annual first. So I intentionally choose to find a challenge every year that puts me in the space of a novice and puts me in a space where I feel at least a little bit frightened. And that was the start of martial arts for me. So I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu now for 3 years. I'm 54 this year, so I actually started in my 50s. That is questionable how sane that is, but there you go. And it started as a part of my 12-month challenge. You know, I've turned up to a place where I've done no prior martial arts. So it's basically turning up and putting myself in the space of deep learning, deep uncertainty, and you know, a good measure of fear. It's like I don't know what to expect, but it's all full contact sparring, so I'm expecting that it won't be easy, you know. And I try to do that every year. Find something that's either short or long duration that puts me in that space. So some of the kinds of things that I've done, learned to fly, did a comedy course, deep scuba diving, diving with sharks, writing and performing poetry, solo survival walks. I try to find something every year.
Wow.
Some of those things become lifelong habits. So I reckon the martial arts, for as long as the body will stand it, will be part of that, because it's a regular exposure to pressure and duress, and it's a regular exposure to you win some, you lose some. It's a regular exposure to humility, to just keep showing up, and you'll get better. Some days you feel like nothing's happening, but if you keep turning up, you'll progress. And then other daily habits are, looking towards really good quality food, particularly the first food that I put into my system in the day, and good quality sleep and daily meditation. And those things, while they're daily habits, I don't always do daily, but if I'm kind of missing them for more than 3 days, then I start to have a long, hard look at myself.
Yeah, and I really like, your habit of sort of setting that yearly challenge, something totally new, something that's totally out of your comfort zone, because that's one area that I talk a lot with my clients, and do a lot of guest speaker around sort of people moving from employee to entrepreneur. And one of the things I talk about with the mindset for success is about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And exactly
Absolutely.
what you were saying, you can sit and just sort of plod along in your life, and you're actively going out and choosing to sort of put yourself. And do you find that since you've been doing that for a few years, do you find that the new things get less scary and less uncomfortable, or are they always uncomfortable?
No, they're always a little bit uncomfortable. And part of the reason for doing that is I find as I get older, there's more of a tendency to feel like there's also a sense in which I know less than I've ever known. The more you know, the more you don't know. But you acquire a body of knowledge that there's a lot of things you feel like with a fair degree of certainty. And so I reckon as you get older, it's easier to fall into grooves where you don't challenge your thinking and your perspective, and that's really dangerous, I think. The second thing is I ask people all the time to put themselves into uncomfortable positions. I think any time you position yourself as a teacher, if you're any good, you're going to be challenging people's perspective, and sometimes that'll be mind-blowing epiphany, and sometimes it'll just be the 1%ers. But if I'm asking people to do that, then I should be doing it myself, not going, I evolved that 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and now I'm just rinse and repeating. I should be looking for my own cutting edge. And I think the last part about it is that it reminds you that it actually doesn't get easier, and that's okay. I think we've got a bit of an illusion that life should be easy, and I sort of look around and go, there's not really any evidence to suggest that that's true. There are times when it's easy, and there are times when it's hard, and I think one of the ways you can build your resilience and your ability to stay thinking under pressure is to deliberately expose yourself to pressure, and those annual challenges are a way to do it.
And what's been the most uncomfortable challenge for you of the annual ones?
Look, they've all had their moments. I deliberately choose them for that. But I actually think, certainly in recent times, the first class I did in martial arts was probably it, because I had no idea what I was walking into. I thought my perception of martial arts gyms was that I'd find a whole heap of pretty violent meatheads who wanted to hurt you. I wasn't sure how that would go. But the reality is very different from that. It's an environment of deep respect and trust. And in fact, that's one of the curious things about it. If you want to train in violence, you've got to do it in a way that you don't actually damage the people you train with. The goal is we all get better together. And even though it's an individual sport, if I can improve you, that by nature improves me. But walking into it, I really didn't know what to expect, and there was a lot of nervous anticipation on day one that didn't really go away for probably the first 3 months, I reckon.
Well, I feel quite pleased that I've done at least a few on your list. So I've done Thai boxing, so the martial arts, and I've also done diving with sharks and deep diving. I am quite pleased that I have put myself in those same uncomfortable situations. So that's good. That's a kinship now.
Excellent. One of the things I would say about that, Liz, is, because a lot of people interpret it as I should go and do something really crazy.
Yeah.
I always say choose something that is that for you.
Yeah.
And that could be as simple for some people as I'm just going to leave my house and go and introduce myself to a stranger.
Yeah.
I'm just going to try and save some money. I'm just going to try and not drink for a month. Yeah. So, it doesn't have to be jump off buildings, swim with sharks, parachute, martial arts. Those things work for me because I'm fairly physical and I like fitness and I'm fairly tactile. But people should choose those things at a level that suits them. It shouldn't be mindlessly terrifying. It should just be uncomfortable.
Yeah, fantastic.
Try a new dish at your local restaurant, maybe.
I'm quite happy with that challenge. When we're allowed to sit inside restaurants, we've still got to sit outside, and it snowed today. It snowed in April.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, today. But last week, we were sitting outside in the garden in the sunshine. So I don't know what's going on with the weather.
Yeah, wow.
So if you could start it all over again, what would you do differently?
I reckon, I don't know that I would actually change all that much, Liz. I partly think that the journey is such a part of who you become and what you're capable of. And one of my principles is that I really don't hold regret. It's, regret's an interesting thing. It's only possible post something. And you're looking back with whatever you learned, and that's why you regret it. At the time you chose what you chose, and you probably did it thinking, I'll regret this. Probably not. But if I could change one thing, what it would be is that I would try and find ways to establish my belief in myself quicker. So for a long time, I felt like I had to be coupled to somebody else for credibility. And I was really quite nervous about owning my own knowledge and my own positioning. And there were lots of other people who could see it and see its value long before I could, and who were trying to, come on, Mike, go for it. That'd be awesome. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not even sure if it's a thing. So it would be to try and find that somehow. Now, how you do that without the journey, I don't know, because, in part, success breeds success, right? You try something and it works and you go, oh, I learned something, or you try something and it doesn't work and you adjust it or abandon it, depending on what's appropriate. So that would be it. If I could fast track that, then I'd probably be 25 years ahead of where I am now, I reckon.
Oh, no, but you wouldn't be in the middle of the outback on your own on your birthday.
Right. That's it.
Walking around for 200 miles. So thinking about, you've done a lot of reading, you've been interviewing all these amazing leaders in Australia and beyond. And I'm sure over your career and, your life as an entrepreneur as well, and as a survival instructor, you've received a lot of advice from other people. So what do you think has been the best piece of advice that you've received around success and sort of sparking success?
Yeah, great question. So I think probably twofold is take the risk and back yourself. And, that's something that's, as we just discussed, a little bit tricky to do for some of us. The second piece, which I think is is pretty significant as well, is build habits. So find the things that work for you and really entrench them as much as you can into your life. And for me, that's quite a deep challenge, because I'm a fairly sort of go with the flow. And for a long time, the thought of things like daily routines and disciplines and things like that felt really constrained.
Yeah.
They actually build freedom, which is sort of paradoxical. And I think there's, when you think about things like sleep and exercise and meditation and diet, there's plenty of things on that list that work for everybody, but then there's also unique things to you where if you do that consistently, it will have a massive impact. So find those things and work really hard to understand them about yourself, and then build them into your everyday.
And it's true, isn't it? These habits that, you'll do them every day and you'll think, oh, they do make a difference. But when you miss a few days, you really notice the impact that they've had, or, by omission. So,
yes.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. So, I've been really interested in sort of talking to you, Mike, and, it's been fantastic to hear more about your story. So where can people find out more, and where's the best place for them to go?
So the best spot is mikehouse.com.au, and that's just MIKE, house like a building you live in.com.au. And there's a whole bunch of stuff there, blog posts, resources. If people want copies of the Unshakable book, they can buy that there. And that ships globally, by the way. So at the moment, that's the only spot we're selling it. But if people around the UK or Europe want it, then more than happy to ship it. And there's other info there about me and some of the things that I've done, and some resources that you can download, etc. too.
Fantastic. And you're quite active on LinkedIn as well. And I know the link's on your website, so people can go through and follow you or connect there as well.
Yeah, for sure. If you look for Mike House on LinkedIn, I'll probably be fairly close to the top of the list because of how active I am. There are a few Mike Houses. So I've called myself the Mike House. If you're looking for me on LinkedIn, that helps.
And I think you've got a great profile picture of you speaking on the stage, I think, if I recall rightly.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And look, I'm really happy, Liz, for people to contact me and have conversations. So on my website and on LinkedIn as well, if you connect with me, I've got my email and phone numbers there. I'm more than happy for people to touch base and ask questions and throw ideas and challenges around. And that's always really interesting and engaging too.
Fantastic. So I'll make sure all the links are included in the show notes for anyone that's listening to this or watching on YouTube. So thank you, Mike. It's been absolutely incredible to speak to you. And I'm going to go away and think about what my challenge is for this year, what the uncomfortable thing will be for me to do this year. And I'll let you know.
Fantastic, Liz. I look forward to hearing what it'll be.
Thanks so much, Mike. So, and thank you for listeners for joining us today, and viewers if you're on YouTube. And join me for the next episode where I'll be joined by another amazing guest. And if you have been inspired by what you've heard today and you'd like to book a chat with myself, you can book a call on sparksucceed.co.uk. The link will be again in the show notes. So, Mike, thanks so much for joining me. You can go off and have your dinner now.
It's an hour of martial arts before dinner, Liz. But thank you though, and enjoy your trip to wherever you're off to with your newfound freedom.
Thank you, and that's a great way to work up an appetite. So thanks so much, Mike. Take care. Enjoy your martial arts.
My pleasure. Thank you.